The first time I sat at a dinner table with French children, I kept waiting for the moment. You know the one. The moment when a 4-year-old decides that whatever is on the plate is suddenly unacceptable. When the negotiations begin. When someone slips out of their chair and has to be coaxed back with a combination of patience and quiet desperation. When a parent's voice rises, just slightly with the fatigue of the 5th refusal in 20 minutes. I sat there and waited. It never came. The children ate, genuinely ate, tasted things, asked questions about what was on the table, went back for seconds of dishes I would not have predicted. I thought, these must be unusually easy children, lucky parents, an anomaly. It took me almost a year of reading, and more than a few conversations with French mothers who looked genuinely puzzled by my questions, to understand what I had witnessed. It was not luck, it was not temperament, it was not some mysterious quality of French children that defies ordinary parenting. It was rhythm. And at the center of that rhythm was a single practice so quiet, so embedded in daily life, that I nearly dismissed it when I first encountered it. By the end of this, you will understand exactly what that practice is, where it comes from, and why adjusting one small thing about your afternoon can shift the entire experience of the dinner table, not in theory. In practice, often within a week, the practice has a name, pas de grignotage. It means literally no nibbling, no grazing, no crackers at 3 o'clock, no trail of cheese puffs through the afternoon, no slow drip of juice and small bites between lunch and dinner. French families have operated by this principle for generations, not as a dietary restriction enforced with difficulty, but as a cultural understanding about how children, hunger, and time fit together. Pamela Druckerman, the American journalist who spent years raising her children in Paris and documented the experience in bringing Up Bébé, was among the first to name these patterns clearly for English-speaking readers. She noticed that French children did not seem to operate on the snack every 90-minute schedule that had become entirely standard in American parenting culture. She noticed the dinner table difference almost immediately upon arriving in France. What took longer, and what gives her account its genuine weight, was tracing that difference back to its source. The source was always the afternoon. Nutrition researchers at INSERM, France's National Biomedical Research Institute, have spent considerable time studying what consistent meal structure does to children's appetite regulation over time. Their findings all point in one direction. Children raised with predictable eating windows develop stronger interoceptive awareness, the capacity to read their own internal signals of hunger and fullness accurately. Over months and years of living inside a rhythm, they learn to distinguish between genuine hunger and the boredom or restlessness or habit that sends a child to the kitchen to stand in front of an open refrigerator at 2:30 in the afternoon. They learn to hear what their bodies are saying, because they are given the quiet in which to listen. That is the foundation. Now let me tell you how this looks on an ordinary Tuesday. French families do not simply remove afternoon snacks and leave a gap. There is one sanctioned afternoon moment, le goûter. It happens at around 4 o'clock consistently, and it is treated with a small but genuine degree of ritual. Le goûter might be a piece of baguette spread with salted butter and topped with a square of dark chocolate, a combination so specific to French childhood that adults in France describe it with something close to nostalgia. It might be a cup of warm milk and a few plain biscuits, a small bowl of seasonal fruit, a slice of cake from the boulangerie on a Friday afternoon. It is specific, it is satisfying, and when it is over, the kitchen closes until dinner. There is no extension, no second helping that stretches into a third, no gradual drift back into grazing. Le goûter is a moment, not a mode. What makes this practice work is not what le goûter contains, but what it promises. Children know it is coming. That knowledge, the certainty that food arrives at a fixed time, changes the quality of the entire afternoon in ways that are both psychological and physiological. A 2018 study published in the journal Appetite found that children given predictable eating schedules showed significantly lower food-seeking behavior in the hour before dinner compared to children who received snacks on demand throughout the afternoon. The structure itself creates calm. Children stop asking because they already know the answer. Here is the part that stopped me when I first started thinking seriously about trying this. I had a 5-year-old at the time who had grown up with fairly open access to the snack shelf. The idea of telling her that food now happened on a schedule felt, honestly, uncertain. Not wrong exactly, just unfamiliar enough to make me hesitate, and the first few days were not seamless. The first afternoon she asked for crackers at 3:30 and I said gently, "Le goûter is at 4." There was real protest. Not performance, genuine upset. What I held on to was something a French mother had said to me in a conversation I found myself returning to often. She is not suffering. She is learning that hunger is not an emergency. That sentence did something to me, because I realized I had been treating hunger as an emergency every time it appeared, a signal that demanded an immediate response, a small discomfort that had to be smoothed over before it grew into something harder to manage. The French relationship with this moment is different. Child development researchers call the capacity to tolerate brief discomfort while waiting for something anticipated frustration tolerance, and decades of developmental data identify it as one of the strongest predictors of self-regulation across childhood and into adolescence. Goûter, practiced consistently over weeks and months, is daily training in that skill, not by explicit design, simply by what it does to the afternoon and to the child moving through it. I spent time going through the nutritional guidelines that govern French school canteens, and one detail surfaced repeatedly in a way I found genuinely illuminating. French schools are required by the Ministry of National Education to serve meals in a formal sequence, with a mandated minimum sit-down duration, and no food is permitted between morning arrival and the lunch service. This is not a philosophy that individual French families have chosen in cultural isolation. The rhythm is institutionally embedded. Children experience the same meal structure at home and at school simultaneously, and that double consistency reinforces something that no single household can fully replicate alone. It is not just a parenting approach. It is a shared social contract about time and food and childhood, which means that for parents outside France who want to try this, there will be friction that French parents largely do not face, and that friction is worth naming honestly. Most people assume that a hungry child before dinner is a situation that demands an immediate fix. The French assumption runs precisely the other direction. Mild, building hunger in the hour before a meal is not a problem to solve. It is the beginning of dinner working. The word French families use in this context is le rythme, which means rhythm. The body functions better when it knows when food is coming, and that internal clock is something children build through repetition over time, not something any of us arrive with fully formed. A longitudinal study published in Pediatric Obesity followed the eating patterns of French and American children between the ages of 2 and 7. The French children in the study showed measurably wider dietary variety at mealtimes and far fewer food refusal behaviors. The most consistent predictors of dietary variety, across both cohorts, were structured mealtimes and limited between meal eating. The finding that stayed with me longest was this. Children who arrived at the table in a state of genuine hunger were significantly more willing to try unfamiliar foods than children whose appetite had been blunted by afternoon snacking. Hunger, it turns out, is the most reliable seasoning available. It requires no preparation and no negotiation. It simply works. That is the mechanism at the heart of pas de grignotage. Dinner does not become easier because children are taught to comply. It becomes easier because hunger has done the preparation that no amount of encouragement, bribing, or creative plating ever reliably achieves. Here is the take that I think will land differently for different people, and I want to say it plainly. I think we have fundamentally misread what we call picky eating in many young children. We treat it as a preference problem. This child does not like this texture, this flavor, this unfamiliar green vegetable on the left side of the plate. But much of what plays out at the dinner table is actually an appetite problem. A child who has been grazing since 3 in the afternoon is not being difficult at 6 o'clock. They are simply not hungry, and they are being asked to engage with a meal their body has no biological interest in at that moment. The negotiations, the refusals, the tears over a piece of broccoli that last Tuesday they ate without comment. So much of it softens or disappears entirely when hunger is permitted to arrive first. What strikes me about this, when I step back from the specifics and look at the pattern, is what it reveals about how we have come to think about children's discomfort more broadly. There is a strong and understandable instinct in contemporary parenting culture to smooth every moment of want immediately, to interpret a child's request as a need that requires an instant and caring response. The French meal rhythm quietly challenges that instinct at its root. It does not say that discomfort is good for children in some punishing sense. It says that a small amount of waiting, held warmly and predictably, is how patience is built. Not by lecture, by repetition. I am genuinely curious about something, and I want to ask it directly rather than leaving it rhetorical. When your child asks for a snack 40 minutes before dinner, what actually happens in your house? Is it a negotiation every time? A quiet internal calculation about whether this is the moment to hold the line or let it go? Or have you found some rhythm, maybe accidentally, that has simply stopped the question from arising with the same frequency? Tell me in the comments. The specific, honest answers are always more useful and more interesting than anything I could anticipate here. When children arrive at dinner genuinely hungry, something follows that is harder to measure but immediately recognizable. The table becomes a place they want to be. In French family culture, the evening meal carries a quality that the rest of the day does not. It is not rushed, it is not optimized. Children are expected to sit, to participate, to taste things, to be present. But this expectation is sustainable only because hunger has prepared them for it. The table works because the afternoon was protected. The French concept of le cadre, the frame, a clear and stable structure, applies here precisely. Le cadre describes a set of expectations that remain consistent regardless of mood, negotiation, or the particular difficulty of a given afternoon. Dinner at the table at a consistent hour is part of the cadre. Children know it is coming. They know what it looks like. And because they are genuinely hungry when it arrives, they have every biological reason to meet it willingly rather than defensively. Druckerman writes about watching French children sit through unhurried evening meals with multiple courses and foods they had not chosen, not because they were suppressed or unusually compliant by nature, but because they were engaged. A hungry child is curious about food in a way that a filled child simply is not. That curiosity, that leaning forward quality, is what makes new foods possible. What turns the dinner table from a battleground into something closer to what it is supposed to be. A place where the family gathers, slows down, and actually shares time. Something I hear consistently from parents who have made this shift is that the change arrives more quietly than they expected. There is no single dramatic evening when everything resolves. What happens is more like a gradual tuning. The negotiations taper, the refusals become less urgent. Dinner becomes, over a week or 10 days, something that simply works. If you try adjusting the snack rhythm tonight, setting a goûter at a fixed time and closing the kitchen after it, I would genuinely love to know what you find in the first few days. Come back and tell me. The most common difficulty parents describe in making this shift is not the child. It is the environment. Snacks are offered everywhere, often by people who love your child deeply, grandparents, caregivers, the friend at the playground with a generously shared bag of crackers. Building consistency in a world saturated with between-meal food requires a kind of gentle, persistent clarity that takes real energy to maintain, especially in the first weeks. What helps parents tell me is being specific rather than explanatory, not a lecture about meal rhythm and interoceptive awareness. Just a warm and simple, we have goûter at 4 and then dinner. Said consistently, said without apology, and eventually it becomes its own quiet normal that the people around your family begin to absorb and respect. So here is what I want to leave you with. Pas de grignotage is not about withholding food from children. It is not about strictness, or making childhood harder, or proving a philosophical point at the expense of a hungry small person. It is about trusting that a child who has been allowed to arrive at the table genuinely hungry will meet that table differently than a child who has been filled in small continuous increments all afternoon. That the meal when it comes will mean something. One small thing to try tonight. Nothing between lunch and le goûter at a fixed time of your choosing. Make it something warm and specific, a piece of fruit and something satisfying beside it. A bit of good bread and something to put on it. Not elaborate, just consistent, and then let dinner come when it comes. You do not need to announce a new philosophy. You do not need to have the conversations about what is changing or why. You just need to let the rhythm begin. In a few days you may notice something at the dinner table. Not a transformation, a quietness, where the negotiating used to be, a child leaning toward the food rather than away from it. That quietness is hunger, it is patient, and it has been doing this work for French families for a very long time. If this connected with something for you, there is a video on this channel about le cadre, the French concept of clear, warm limits that create freedom rather than restrict it, that I think you will find is the natural next piece of this conversation. Thank you for being here. I will see you there.